Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Walk. I'm Tony Leon, your host. This is the place where you'll be enlightened, encouraged, and empowered to work out your own salvation without fear of being led astray. For we walk by faith and not by sight. And God's word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. And as we go on this journey together, we're going to follow the Lamb, Jesus Christ, wherever he goes, and we should do so in spirit and in truth. We're going to get right into our program with our topic of the day. How in the world? I'm sorry. How? Sorry. I think I'm going to go on live next time. I mean, not live. Okay, one moment. We got a little technical difficulty right quick. Now I'm in outer space.
A mob of Trump-supporting terrorists stormed the U.S. Capitol on...
Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to edit this out. Now, we're going to get right into our topic of the day with how to resolve any conflict. So let's go right over there. Let's check it out. Okay, now we're going to go over a couple points to set up this because I was going to show you a little quick video, but I want to set up the stage for how to resolve any conflict. Now, we're going to the next slide where we're talking about the Thomas Kilmann model. Now, this is where we kind of find these strategies on resolving conflicts. Now, it identifies 5 different approaches to resolving these conflicts. And here they are: avoiding, accommodating, compromising, competing, and collaborating. Now, let's go over some of these points. I wanted to explain to you how, from the perspective of what they have, just from what I read, it seems to me that they have some flaws. Okay, but this is just my perspective. And the flaws I'm going to bring out, and I'm going to explain to you why I think that they are flaws, and then I'm going to go into where I think that they shine, as far as not these strategies, but the overall concept about how we need conflict resolution. So, avoiding. Now, they say avoiding is someone who uses a strategy of avoiding mostly tries to ignore or sidestep the conflict, hoping it will resolve itself or dissipate. Now, I don't know about you, but just listening to that, avoiding, that could be a strategy to resolve a conflict. I guess you could think about it in a carnal sense, because some people just don't like conflict. They don't like confrontation or any type of disruption or disturbance. When they see some type of conflict, they usually bolt. That's B-O-L-T. They go in the opposite direction. And is that really resolving a conflict? Hoping that it will resolve itself or dissipate. Sometimes people say time heals. And when you think about time heals, does it really heal? I mean, maybe on the person who created the conflict, maybe, but maybe not on the other person's end. The other person's end is probably still sulking in sorrow, and they're feeling bad about what happened. And is time really going to heal that? Not necessarily. It may be over time you may heal, but not time itself. So think about avoiding. And I like to look at the flaw in that is basically avoiding, just the name itself, the strategy of resolving a conflict of avoiding. Let's try the avoiding strategy. And I see just basically sidestepping and weaving and waving away from the conflict. It's pretty bad. Accommodating. Let's think about accommodating. Using the strategy of accommodating to resolve conflict essentially involves taking steps to satisfy the other party's concerns or demands at the expense of your own needs or desires. I think we all can see some flaws with that, because when you think about accommodating, you're not thinking about basically yourself. You're thinking about others, or how I like to say it, appeasing others, pandering to others, thinking about, okay, maybe this is the best way. Maybe there's some bullying involved. You never know, because accommodating sounds kind of like flawed just from that. You're not thinking about yourself. What about your needs? Skip your needs and your desires. Let's think about the other person. Okay. I like to look at the example of what happened with the Republican Party. I talked about them last week. Republicans insurrection, treason and plot. When I think about accommodating, I think about, and I know people might say, wow, that might be so true. Here you have the Democratic Party. They were just known for accommodating or pandering to them, where the needs of the people are basically sidestepped, are put off to the side and say, you know what, we need to pander. We need to appease our colleagues on the other side. And to me, it seemed like you can't get any type of resolution like that. Flawed already. Compromising. Now, some people may think, okay, now we're getting somewhere, right? Compromising is the strategy of compromising involves finding an acceptable resolution that will partly, but not entirely, satisfy the concerns of all parties involved. That sounds pretty good, right? So I'm looking at when you compromise, it's like a give and take. It's just that it has to be fair. I guess you got to think about it like that, because not everybody's going to get what they want, but everybody could be satisfied with, okay, at least we got something. Now, again, I like to use the example, what happened with Obama when he was in office. And they had the House, they had the Senate, and of course the presidency, the Oval Office. And he basically wanted health care. And it was a good bill from what I've gathered, where it started off with. But what happened was, I guess when you think about compromising, you have to think about both parties involved and where they stand. Well, as far as I understand, where you stand and you have a better, what you call it? You have a better hand, if I could put it that way. The hand you were dealt, so to speak. You have to look at it like from the perspective of, okay, man, we don't have to pander too much because we already have, the House, we have the Senate. So let's see what we can work out with them. But we already know where we have plans because the people have, spoken. They want us to so-called get things done. But then the compromising kicked in, where it was more like did they have to compromise? I'm talking about the physical action of compromising, because they already had all the votes. I mean, some people might think, okay, yeah, you may have all the votes and stuff like that, but it wouldn't be fair because the other people, the other party, they won't have any votes at all. Well, let me explain real quick. The Democratic Party, all the votes, they didn't need not one Republican vote to get the health care bill passed. And it was pretty good. I mean, actually it was pretty good. I mean, I looked at it. So what happened was they come to the negotiating table. Do you really need to negotiate if you already have the upper hand? It's almost like the other side basically say, oh, I fold because, you already win. Okay, so here you have the Republican Party say, well, we like this. And then it was a lot of things that had nothing to do with healthcare. It was just other things in there for their constituents or their cronies or the businesses that back their campaign or whatever like that. And as they kept on negotiating, you started seeing this nice, decent healthcare bill turn into something that was ugly, in my opinion. It didn't look too good. But it was a healthcare bill. But in it wasn't healthcare stuff. It was a lot of other stuff from the other side. So the compromising was more like did they have to compromise? See, that's the flaw right there. Because when you are the head of the house, so to speak, there's very little compromising. There's more like okay, we can work something out, but we already got our plans. So compromising is all flawed. Because when you think about it, the Republican Party, when they got the House and the Senate, and the presidency, they weren't like that to the other side. They weren't playing fair. They were basically saying, hey, we got the House, the Senate, and the presidency. We're going to get things done according to what we want. Now, what do you all want? Well, we want this. Nah. And that's what was happening. So you got to think about where you stand for the compromising, because compromising is somewhat flawed. It depends on where you stand. Competing. Now, competing is someone who uses the conflict resolution strategy of competing, tries to satisfy their own desires at the expense of the other parties involved. In other words, that's what I just gave you an example. They basically said, we got this and we're going to do what we want. We don't need your input. We don't want nothing from you. We're going to do what we want. That's competing. They didn't give them anything when they were in office. It's kind of weird when you think about it, because when you think about conflict resolution, You have to have something to bring to the table to both parties can benefit from. Competing takes that away. Accommodating kind of takes that away too, because you basically give it up. But look at the last one, collaborating. Using collaborating involves finding a solution that entirely satisfies the concerns of all involved parties. Let me say that again. Collaborating involves finding a solution that entirely satisfies the concerns of all parties, all involved parties. Now, when you get to that, that sounds beautiful to me, because I'm thinking about, we get our way, you hear me? We get our way and you get your way. Hey, win-win, right? I've never seen that happen, but there's a flaw with it because it comes down to, you have your way and we have our way. Nobody's going to get their way. So I don't see how collaborating works unless you're both on the same page. See? Let's think about this one right quick. I want to show you all something real quick. But before we get into it, I want to give you all some definitions. Let's think about this, because these are some things I think we need to remind ourselves about. Fascism. Okay. A political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader. Severe economic and social regimentation and forcible suppression of opposition. Okay, now when you think about that, fascism, and a lot of people never really paid attention to what fascism means because it's just thrown around so loosely, especially nowadays in this political arena. It's basically explaining things that you can relate to and say, Mussolini, Napoleon, Hitler, almost, I'm gonna say almost, Donald Trump, because it was going that way. The democracy was basically hanging in the balance, and it was toward the fascism. But then there's some other words that we need to understand too, because this one right here, we need to understand, and that's treason. I said this last week. The crime of betraying one's country, especially by attempting to kill the sovereign or overthrow the government. That's what we saw last week when we talked about what happened on January 6th. And then keeping in mind this one, I'm going to go over this last one right here, and that is the person that's associated with treason, which is traitor. A person who betrays a friend, country, principle, etc. Now, we don't have to play by the rules of fairness, not necessarily. We don't have to even have conflict resolution, not necessarily. But we do have a democracy. And in that democracy, there is what you call the law of fairness. That's what I like to call. The law of fairness is almost like do unto others as you have them do unto you. Okay? And like I say, God and country, love God with all thy heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And we're all citizens of this great country. So I'm looking at it from that perspective, like we all live here. So we all have differences of opinions and lifestyles and all kinds of different things like that. So you're always going to have some type of conflicts. And like what I read, those 5 points, let me say it again: avoiding, accommodating, compromising, competing, and of course, collaborating. They all have some flaws in there when it's not based upon fairness. Now, how can we be fair if we think about the concept that I want to get my way no matter what? It should be a give and take. But who determines that give and take? We got to think about that. I want to show this video right quick, and I want to come right back to those points. So think about what happened in this nation on January 6th. Again, it's not a part 2, it's just continuation. How about that? And before we continue to go on, okay, this is on Peacock, and she's a comedian, but at the same time, she has a talk show. And I think some of you all probably seen her before. And I want you all to understand that she basically tells a little thing about how you can tell the difference between, fascism, Nazism, and, you know, stuff like that. So just check it out. It's a few minutes, like 2 minutes. Check it out right quick.
A mob of Trump-supporting terrorists stormed the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday in an effort to overturn a fair and legal election and subvert democracy. It has honestly been a lot to take in, and my personal feelings have ranged from rage to devastation to embarrassment. But the largest takeaway for me feels too important to put into words. So I wanted to put it in a song. At least it wasn't us. That's right. Black people got to sit this one out and just watch it from the sidelines. And frankly, I love that for us. So if black people didn't create this mess, who did? Well, there seemed to be some confusion in the media about that this week. The press was calling the folks who stormed the Capitol building protesters and Trump supporters. And in one case, West Virginia state delegate. That's an actual West Virginia state delegate who filmed himself storming the Capitol building. I'm not making that up. But in actuality, the people who gathered in Washington on Wednesday are Nazis, traitors, and fascists. That's what they are. I don't know why it is so hard for reporters to call them that. It's easy. Look, I'll show you in a game called Nazis, Traitors, or Fascists. This police officer opened a gate to let an angry mob into a government building. Now, which one is he? A Nazi, a traitor, or a fascist? That's right, he's a traitor. And how about the guy in the Camp Auschwitz shirt? That's right, he's a Nazi. Now, this guy with the Confederate flag? That's right, he's a traitor. That flag literally means traitor. There was a whole war because of it. Senators Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, they tried to stop the electoral count and overturn our democracy, making them, that's right, fascists and traitors. And of course, this is all three. This has been Nazis, traitors, or fascists. See? That was easy. I can do it, and I didn't even go to a journalism school. I'm just a lady with a mouth and some words.
Okay. Now, let's get back to this. So what y'all just saw was basically this example of how just anybody and everybody views what happened on the 6th. This is not something that you have to make up. If you're just being fair, you got to think about what really happened. Were we under attack? Was there fascism? Was there treason? You know, and I know you're probably thinking, like, okay, if that's the case, then why weren't the traitors, you know, dealt with justice, so to speak? Now, just check this guy out. Remember, we talked about him before, and I said this, he did that. That's him, Josh Hawley. This guy right here was one of them. Like the lady said, she said that it was Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley. Those were the main instigators of this thing. This guy's walking around like no big deal. And he's still, you know, planting his poison in the media. And I kept thinking, like, you know, if we had this thing that we used to have called the Fairness Act, okay? I think it came out in, 1949, I believe. But it was done away with in 1987 by guess who? President Reagan. Now, there was a whole big controversy about this Fairness Act. Like, what is the Fairness Act? It had to do with the FCC, you know, Federal Trade Commission. And basically they had to make sure that everybody who was in the media was being fair. They're not putting out crazy stuff out there, you know, derogatory, you know, just slanderous material or things that's not true that they're saying is true. So it was kind of like that. I mean, that's just the basic of it. And then you have to get so much time to opposing opinions or views to explain. So that way, it's not that you believe in every view, but you have to put it out there so everybody will have access to all types of information so they won't just be indoctrinated by one view. Okay, that's what's been happening right now with Fox. Okay, Fox News, cable news, they have this thing. I don't know exactly how it came about, But somehow they benefited from Ronald Reagan doing away with the Fairness Act. Okay? So the FCC, they basically was hands off every time you want to say something, and it wasn't true. But that's not fair. So what happened was, all these years that went by, I'm talking about since the late 80s, early 90s, all the way to the 2000s, you've been seeing it ramped up on Fox News, basically saying willy-nilly anything. Now, if you're just accustomed to watching only one station and just seeing that one station all the time, you're being indoctrinated. This is what they call television programming. But as you're seeing this one view, you're starting to think, wow, it must be true because it's the news. Okay, so think about it from that perspective. So just recently, something happened, okay, in the news. Check this out. We know him. He's been around for a while. That's Lou Dobbs. Does anyone know what happened to him? I mean, I know that, you know, some people only use the chat for the chat comments, but then we also have regular comment area for the actual video. So if you can, later on, if you're typing in the chat, put it into the actual comment area of the actual YouTube video. But right here, this is Lou Dobbs. He is probably the biggest person, because some people think it's Hannity, but it's not. It was Lou Dobbs. Lou Dobbs is like the biggest person on Fox News. Yeah. And he basically did something that he shouldn't have done. He wasn't being fair. Okay. So what happened was, he basically, not just him, it was some others. You know, this is Fox News. So they basically pride themselves on putting out whatever kind of thing that's just willy-nilly, okay? And he basically did something that I really want my wife to break it down, because she broke it down to me. Yeah, you can do it, honey. Come on.
Lou Dobbs, Fox News, and some other people on Fox News, they were spreading misinformation, quote, lies about voting machines. And the company got wind of it, and they asked them to stop, and they did not stop. So now they have a multi-trillion-dollar lawsuit.
Oh, well, 2.7 billion, I think. 2.7 billion, that's what it was. Yeah, so this is messed up, you all. That's what a B. $2.7 billion lawsuit. I'm sorry, what was the name of the place, honey? Help me out. Smartmatic. Now, they're the ones that had like the software that ran the voting machines, okay? So what Lou Dobbs was basically saying in so many words, that was how the Democrats cheated the election. And they kept putting it out there. Well, it was proven, okay, that the Democrats did not cheat. But somehow, Fox News, and because you don't have the Fairness Act, everybody's hearing this and they're being indoctrinated to think the Democrats, they cheated. They're not being fair. That's what they're saying. And this is the news. And Lou Dobbs was the poster child to basically put it out there that this is true. Now, like I said, Smartmatic, the person at Smartmatic said, hey, you can't do that. You can't put it out there. And they were warned more than once. And as they were warned, they continue to ramp it up. Boom, 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 saying, yeah, they cheated. Okay, so that's what I'm picking up that will cause the so-called rampage on January 6th. Because most of these people were looking at Fox News, being indoctrinated by this so-called ideology that the Democrats had cheated because of this software helped them to win. But this guy, Smartmatic, said, you got to stop doing that because it wasn't true. Okay. And if the fairness doctrine was around, they wouldn't have dealt with that. They would have said, oh, we retract our statement and we're sorry, we were misinformed. Okay, but that wasn't the case. So then the guy from Smartmatic, he said, no, I'm suing you all. $2.7 billion. That's what it be. So what happened? Fox News got a little smart and they said, we're going to get rid of Lou Dobbs. They happened to say also, oh, we had planned on getting rid of him anyway. They might have, I don't know. But the bottom line is Fox News is starting to dwindle down all of this so-called crazy heads of people saying all kinds of crazy things because they're indoctrinating people with crazy information. And that's not fair. So what we need to do now is we need to think about what I just said earlier. We have conflict, but we need resolution. But how are we going to have resolution when we're not being fair? So I wanted to talk about some points real quick. One quick point, and that is this. Fairness. Okay, what is fairness? Impartial and just treatment or behavior without favoritism or discrimination. Now, we know that's not true, because what happened was Fox News kept on indoctrinating people, discriminating people, and let people see this so-called racism, this privilege, and all kinds of stuff. And it really wasn't just white privilege. It was rich white privilege, because a lot of white people, they get discriminated against too. But white rich privilege was the main thing, because look who's at Fox News. I mean, all of them are rich. Hannity, he's very rich. I mean, his whole family was rich. You know, he's doing the news just because he's continuing to push the ideology. And a lot of them are just rich. Okay. Matter of fact, most politicians are rich. So when you see the so-called fairness, and think about the fairness doctrine, but let's think about the word fairness. Okay. You got to be fair, right? So let's think about fair. So fair is basically in accordance with the rules or standards, legitimate, just or appropriate in the circumstances. So when we think about being fair, you got to go by the rules. Now it's kind of weird, because we did have rules, but then you take away the rules. Like when Ronald Reagan took away the rule about fairness doctrine, and you could just say willy-nilly. That's not being fair. But it's weird, because they're not breaking the rules. The rules say we can say whatever, because you took away the rules. Just like when you look in sports, you got what? You got football, you got referees, basketball, referees, baseball, you got umpires, you know, and they're basically making sure that all the professionals, maybe these are professional, you know, they basically got to make sure that they are being fair and playing by the rules. So when you take away the umpires and the referees, it's willy-nilly. There's no rules, but there are rules. But what's happening is people who are not playing fair, I'm talking in the general sense, they're making the rules. They're the lawmakers. Do we have lawmakers? Remember that Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz were lawmakers. So it's weird, because not everything that is the law is moral, but not everything that is moral is the law. So you kind of got messed up both ways, because when you think about the moral law, everyone can look at the 10 Commandments and say, that's the moral law. There's a Bible probably in every courtroom, or should I say, every court in the United States. The 10 Commandments. Or is it the Bible or the 10 Commandments? I think it's the 10 Commandments. Because it's the moral law. And everybody realizes that. Every judge, every lawyer, everybody. But it's weird, because you just got all kinds of foul people out here trying to so-called get over on the law, or weasel their way and try to find some type of angle to so-called get their case won. Especially, defense attorneys? So what's happening is, in America, we need conflict resolution. Let's focus on improving your ability to resolve conflict. Now, listen effectively. This is very important. Listen. Most people just don't listen. People always got something to say, but they never listen. Like me, I talk all the time, blah, blah, blah. But then I take time and I listen. We have to have an ear to hear what the Spirit says to us. That's what the Word of God says. So what does it mean to have an ear to hear? That means you have to listen. Listen to that still small voice. That's not just from other people, but that's from the Holy Spirit. See, we are supposed to plant seeds, and as we plant seeds, you're basically planting seeds of righteousness, okay? And as you plant these seeds, they're going to fall on different type of ground. Some on stony ground, some on rock hard ground or whatever, some on good soil. But as you do that, you need one other step, prayer. And as you pray, you're praying for rain. Remember, we're supposed to pray for rain in the time of the latter rain. When is the time of the latter rain? When you plant seeds. Every time you plant a seed, it needs some water. And every time you pray, you can't do that. Our job is not to convince. Our job is to convey. That's planting seeds. And as you do that, some people may listen, some may not listen. It's good if you do listen, because then you'll take it in, not just from the person who's speaking, but also from the Holy Spirit. That still small voice that leads you into all truth, brings things to your remembrance. See, when you do that, you're getting the upper hand on conflict resolution. But look at the others. Identify specific points of disagreement. Again, identify specific points of disagreement. this is so important because most people don't identify specific points of disagreement. Everybody's willy-nilly. Everybody makes some type of assessment based upon their own ideology. Instead of saying, wait a minute, let me identify specifically a point of a disagreement. Why do we disagree? Some people think that this ideology runs wild and is good and A-okay. We can agree to disagree. I don't know where that came from, but whoever made it up, they are not what you call a typical child of God, because a typical child of God will be about their father's business, and not my will, but thy will be done. They'll be thinking about, hey, we're all part of the kingdom of God, and we're supposed to learn how to reason with one another, learn how to live in harmony with one another. Now, other people might not want to live in harmony with you, but you got to learn how to do your part and live in harmony, because you can't live your life for others. You have to live your life for the Lord and for yourself, because you got to be about a work, and that work is about planting seeds. But it's also about listening. So when you think about identifying specific points of disagreement, our job is to identify those specific points. Where do we disagree? Now, we can agree to disagree. No, what is it? If you can't identify that point and specifically lay out that point to show what that point is, your job is not done. You're not here to convince somebody about the point that you disagree with. You just need to identify it. I haven't seen that happen in all of this politics. A lot of people just say, we want this, we want that, this and this, all those Democrats, all those Republicans, and they just keep going back and forth. Instead of saying, wait, let's just come to the table and see where we disagree. Like, here's an example. I agree, or should I say, I disagree with homosexuality. And then the other side might say, well, I agree, homosexuality shouldn't be an issue. And then I'll be like, well, one side might say, well, maybe it's not that it's homosexuality. Maybe the problem is you pushing your homosexuality on others. And people say, well, I like to express myself, and that's part of me. And then the other side be like, well, what if I do my lifestyle and I push it upon you? Would that be fair? And they might say, well, I don't want that on me. I'm not into that Christ thing. So then it'd be like, you got a conflict. So the only way to resolve it is for you all to come to the table and identify what the problem is. Because maybe the resolution is simple. Maybe the resolution would be this. Okay, you are a homosexual and you're into that thing, and I'm not. We both agree on that, right? Yes, we do both agree on that. But you should not push your ideology and your lifestyle upon me, because I got kids, I got a family, we got our own lifestyle. And they might be like, fair enough. So you and your community do your thing. We in our community do our thing. We just let our light so shine that all men may see our good works and glorify God, because that's what we do in our community, And they might say, okay, well, we do our thing in our community. And then maybe, just maybe, you can come to the table and start realizing that our disagreements can be easily resolved, because we don't want to push our ideology upon others. We want to follow the law of fairness, because that would be fair. That's just an example. Then number 3, express your own needs clearly. I just did it. We don't want you to push your thing upon me and my family. That's what we really want. We might not like homosexuality, but we definitely don't want you to push your thing upon us. That's my needs. And then what if their needs is not that that's a part of our expression and we like to just explain and show the world we're gay or whatever. What if it's really that they want to be accepted? Well, you can be accepted as a human being. You don't have to be accepted for your lifestyle. We can love you with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. We can love you as ourselves, but we don't have to love your lifestyle. We need to start identifying these differences, and we need to express our needs clearly. Now, number 4, view conflict as an opportunity for growth. This is so important. A lot of people look at conflict as an opportunity to bolt. That's B-O-L-T. And when you bolt, you go against the biblical principle of 1 Corinthians 13. Where it says we should believe all things, hope all things, endure all things, and bear all things. When we think about bearing, you're supposed to bear, bear the burdens. He said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. So we're supposed to have this bearing. Any burden, especially if it's someone that you love. And when you take on that role of bearing, because it's your, like your brother, your sister, and your brother and sister's keeper, you're looking at it from the perspective of you would like someone to do that to you too, especially when you're down. So when y'all come into the negotiating table and being fair, you have to express yourself and identify what it is. But sometimes there's going to be some rumble bumble, whatever, what you want to call it. I like to call it being rambunctious. It happens. It happens to the best of us. And that when you get riled up and stuff like that, you may raise your voice. And sometimes you may hear someone raise their voice, being upset, frustrated, whatever you want to call it. And then the other person will be like, oh, you raised your voice. And they go in the opposite direction because they don't want conflict. They want to avoid conflict. There's a problem with that because what if God said, oh, he raised his voice, even though he wants us to lift up our voice like a trumpet. Then he goes in the opposite direction. Do you want God to do that to you? Every time you raise your voice, every time you get a little rambunctious. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of we all need to be fair because we got to go through the little turmoil, turbulence, or whatever it may be to get to a resolution. See, it says all things work together for good for those who love the Lord. Now remember, he said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And what are those commandments? Let's think about just those two to focus on. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, if you do that and you love God, see, he said, if you love me, keep my commandments. But all things work together for good for those who love the Lord. So if that's the case, then you ain't got nothing to worry about. So some people may say, I love the Lord, but no. If you love the Lord, you'll keep his commandments, meaning you'll keep them, you'll cherish them. We all fall short of the glory of God because all have sinned, right? But I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about the attitude. The attitude is you want to have conflict resolution. You want to reconcile your differences with your fellow man. That's what you want, right? It might not always work out that way. And the reason why is because you might have some people, like I like to look at Les Brown. If you ever know about Les Brown, he used to talk about toxic people. And toxic people are basically people who don't mean you no good. They're never in your best interest. They just think about you as just some, whatever. And I'm looking at it like, we want people to be in our best interest. Sometimes you just can't hang out with everybody. Some people are just not in your best interest. Sometimes we're unequally yoked. It just happens that way. But the bottom line is we need to identify those things and those differences, okay, and those disagreements. So if you have someone in your life right now that they basically don't want to sit down, listen, hear what you have to say, even if it gets a little turbulence, then it's basically, what can you do? You leave that person? I'm not saying leave that person, but there's one thing you can do. Plant them seeds. And as you do those seeds, plant them seeds, pray. And when you pray and you ask the Lord for rain in the time of the latter rain, you're basically asking the Lord to intervene on your behalf because you can't do it alone. Now, let's look at the last part. Focus on specific issues without generalizing or escalating the situation. Now, if you had the part that I just mentioned about bearing, you might go through that little turbulence. That's all right because, you should, be angry, but sin not. Because when you sin, you fall short of the glory of God. But remember, who's able to keep you from falling? That's Jesus Christ. So we have an opportunity right there to grow. We're going to go through little turbulence, growing pains, and we're going to shine forth as pure gold. We can do that if you don't give up, bear, hope, endure, believe. When you do that, it's going to work together for the good because you love the Lord. Now, I was just looking at it like when you generalize things, it's a very bad thing. When you generalize things, it's almost like this. You're coming before somebody that you wronged, and that person said, you wronged me. Or they might even say that, but you know that you did because they're saying it. And you say, I'm sorry if I offended you. If you offended you, you did offend them. So it's one of those things you got to understand something. When you basically offend somebody, you're not supposed to say, if I offend you. You're supposed to say, how did I offend you? Remember, the Bible says, well, all thy getting, get understanding. Because remember, wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. And with all that getting, get understanding. So you need to be wise. Not in your own wise, but being wise is saying, you know what? I think it's in my best interest to find out what's going on with them. What seems to be the matter? Instead of saying, something's wrong with that person. Because that's what you see a lot of times. Sometimes people just draw the conclusion. Remember, it says, don't judge lest ye be judged. That's what's happening a lot of times. We look at somebody and we judge a book by its cover and we draw a conclusion and we say whatever about that person. Instead of saying, wait a minute, let me do my part as a child of God. Remember, you want to be a child of God, right? Let's think about this one text right quick. Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Now, what's a peacemaker? those people who thrive and strive to have conflict resolution. That's what they do. Whether it's you with someone else because someone didn't want to listen, or something's going on between you and that person, or something is going on between somebody else and someone else. I'm not saying to get all involved in somebody's grill or nothing like that. I'm just saying that we need to have one of those attitudes where we're like peacemakers, because it's saying it. Peacemakers are going to be called children of God, because that's what we do. We don't want conflict. There's not going to be conflict in the kingdom of God. So when you have people who avoid, accommodate, appease and stuff like that, compromise, and there's no compromising when it comes down to the Lord. It's either God's way or our way. It's God's way. And then competing, there ain't no competing. There's no big I's or little U's. And then last but not least, collaborating. As far as I'm concerned, yes, collaborating I think is the best of all of them, because if you're on the Lord's side, you want to work with him. You're going to get your way and he's going to get his way and everybody be happy. That's what it seems like to me. Of course, you might think that's easier said than done. Well, no one really said it was easy, but yeah, he said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. So that's Jesus. He said that. But we're foolish. We're human beings. We got issues. We got a lot of baggage in our life. I'm just trying to paint this picture to let you all know that life is a lesson and we need to learn from it. We need to take time and think about what is really happening in our lives right now. Do we have conflict? Maybe we need to identify that. And if we identify that there is conflict in our lives, it needs to be resolved. There needs to be resolution. And in order to have resolution in our lives, we have to be fair. But fair according to what? Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes unto the Father but by me. That means we have to be fair according to his way, his guidelines. Because what I'm seeing right now in our nation, it's like no one will draw the conclusion that someone is right, because everyone will be thinking they're right in their own eyes. I see it on both sides. I do. I see it on the Democrat side. I see it on the Republican side. And that's what's really bothering me, because when I look at these strategies on conflict resolution, they all fail miserably. But when you think about the Lord and biblical principle, you win all the way. But you only win his way. See, that's why I think conflict resolution could easily be resolved when you follow the Lord. Because if you love the Lord, you really love the Lord, you want to follow him, you're going to have conflict resolution. In other words, reconciliation. Because first we got to be reconciled to him. We got to be reconciled to one another. When we think about everybody in our lives right now, we're supposed to love everybody. We're even supposed to love our enemies. So when you're out and about, our job is to let our light so shine. And when you do that, what you're going to have is not an attitude of, well, they got to let their light shine too. No, you're going to be like, I ain't thinking about nobody else but myself and the Lord. I'm going to think about my part and the Lord, because you want to make the Lord happy. Remember, we're supposed to please him. And how you please him? With faith, because it says it's impossible to please God without it. So when you have the attitude, not thinking about others and what they're doing, splinters and beams in each other's eyes, you're thinking about, hey, I'm doing my part because I want to plant some seeds. At the same time, I want to have resolution where there's a conflict, and I want to make sure I follow these guidelines. If you ever go back to this video, look at those points again, because those points are very important. And when we look at how it lays out, let me show you exactly again. I'm going to keep that page for one moment. When you look at listening effectively, just paying attention to people when they talk, identifying specific points of disagreement, meaning actually know what those points are that you disagree on before you say, oh, we can agree to disagree. And then express your own needs clearly, meaning let people know what's on your mind. What are you thinking about? Don't just throw words around idly. And then you got to think about how you need to view conflict as an opportunity for growth. We look through a glass darkly. What does that mean? We're looking in a mirror, but it's dim. So we don't really see ourselves. But remember, one day we're going to see ourselves even as Jesus sees us. That's what's going to happen. Read 1 Corinthians 13 and you'll see what I'm talking about. Because right now we don't see ourselves. We basically just doing whatever we want, going through the motions and everything like that. But sometimes people do see us more than we see ourselves. And that's kind of bad, because we're supposed to learn from ourselves and say, oh man, I got some work to do. in my own life. And then you also have focus on specific issues without generalizing or escalating the situation. Every time you generalize, you don't get specific. We need to start being specific. Some people think it's petty. How can you think it's petty? Have you ever tried it? Have you ever gotten to the point where you say, you know what? Let me give it an honest try. Let me be fair about this. Let me try the Lord in his way, his truth, his life. And when I do that, I know that it's going to work out for the good because I love the Lord. That's how you're going to draw that conclusion. So let's keep these things in mind. I want to focus on that. I want you all to understand that, we just need to pay attention to these things, okay? We're going to talk about some other things in the future on conflict resolution. I want to just point out a couple things real quick. How when you look at people like Lou Dobbs, I'm not looking at Lou Dobbs and say I hate Lou Dobbs, but I do hate what he does, and that is spreading lies. But he's not the only one. There's a lot of people that do that. And when they do that, are they really thinking about being fair? I mean, I'm sorry. He knows better. He's a man. I mean, he can't be that much of a child. I know when you're a child, you think and you speak and you understand as a child. I get that. And when you become an adult, you put away childish things. I get that. But the thing is, this is something I think everybody should know. If you tell a lie, and especially on someone else, you know that's wrong. And we need to understand that. And I'm pretty sure he knows that. And if he doesn't understand it, I mean, it's embarrassing. It's very embarrassing. I hope we all start understanding that we need to start paying attention because other people are waking up. People are waking up and they're starting to see this ideology as very childish. You don't want to be childish. I mean, I'm sorry. Donald Trump was like a big child. He did not deserve the presidency. I mean, he was not qualified. And it's terrible that we even accepted him as our leader. When you think about that, I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about just looking at it for what it really is. I mean, I'm not a child. I'm an adult. I'm pretty sure most of you all are adults too. And when you think it through as a conflict resolution concept, you start understanding some things and you start realizing some things. You know what? I was a child. I think, I speak, I understand as a child. But now I'm an adult. I put away childish things. Don't you want to think like that? Well, if you look at this last text right quick, Philippians 4:8, it talks about these things, how we're supposed to think about. Think on the truth, whatever things are true, just. And if you look at the word just, that's just being fair. Think on what's true, just, pure, lovely, and of good report. And if there be any virtue, any praise, we think on these things. And when you think about those things, you'll be fine. Like I said, we're gonna talk about more of these things later on, but I want you all to understand something. I do love you all, and I'm gonna end it on this point. So, be safe, and look out for one another. Love you all.